Hello and welcome to this episode of Quake It Up. And today we're going to get radical. So you might see I've got my Quake t-shirt on, simple, radical and spiritual. We're going to be looking in particular at that middle word, radical, today. What it is, what Quakers mean by it. Should Quakerism be radical? Is Quakerism radical? And things like that. I think it's a phrase, both radicalism and revival are both phrases that I hear quite a lot when it comes to talking about Quakerism and perhaps where Quakerism should be going as opposed to where Quakerism currently is, maybe. So I've just realised I've yet to do a book review of Primitive Quakerism Revived, which talks a lot about how Quakerism needs to go through a bit of a revival. A really good book. I would recommend it. I will do a book review later on, but just as I was thinking of this video, that book did come up in mind. It also brings me to a recent article in The Friend by Imi, who was on the channel earlier last year, where she also states about how we should look to make Quakerism radical again. And I want to just sort of like tease that out a little bit. I'm not suggesting, I'm not necessarily going to come out of this with answers, but I think it's something worth discussing because it's something that Quakers talk about a lot. And why is that? And what are they looking or hoping for that might come from talks of revival or radicalism? I think it kind of comes from three different angles. And I think although I suppose radical Quakerism and revivalist Quakerism, as we might call it, might look slightly different depending on who's talking about it. I think the reasons why people are talking about it all come from the same sort of attitude. I think firstly, the reason why radical is on this t-shirt is fundamentally originally because Quakers were a very radical group of believers. So Quakerism came out from a very radical view, a radical end of the Reformation. You know, if we consider they were more radical than Luther, they were more radical than John Calvin. You know, they were really pushing the boat out of what the Reformation could and did mean. And I suppose, obviously, we are the inheritors of that. And we might think, well, how are we continuing to live up to that? I think another reason why words like revival and radical Quakerism come about as well is because of dwindling numbers. I think we are very much aware that there are fewer and fewer Quakers, and we're looking for ways to make Quakerism more attractive, or to maybe sort of get back to roots, that sort of idea. And you know, if we've maybe sort of lost our way, and we need to go back to our radical roots so that we can engage with the world and engage with new members, in particular dealing with young people. And that was what Imi's points was in her article in The Friend. I'll put that down below. She was saying that there are views that young people have which she feels aren't being discussed at like yearly meeting level, for example, and that will take a certain radicalism in order to do so. So we need to kind of break free from our own bureaucracy, maybe, that we've created in order to deal with issues that really matter, particularly to young people. And I think the last reason why these terms get bandied around a lot, or why people think that we need a radicalizing or a revivalist moment, is because I think many people think that Quakerism has become a bit too complacent, a bit too sleepy, maybe. You know, I suppose if you look back at what the early Quakers were doing, and you maybe compare it to maybe some meetings for worship, which might be just a bit quiet, not really very animated, and people might think, well, that's not what the Quakerism of early Quakers, and I kind of just wish we go back to that. I think I've said before, I kind of wish that we had the early Quakerism back, or certainly the zeal back, which maybe is lacking in you know, maybe your day-to-day meeting. I suppose both when talking about radicalism in Quakerism and reviving Quakerism, I think that they're both inherently looking back. I think they're both looking at that glorious past that we had and all the things that we've done, things like prison reform, the abolitionist movement, work within work for conscientious objection, work for peace, all that sort of stuff. I think sometimes we feel maybe we've got a really heavy baggage when we look at that, and we looking at ourselves and we think, well, are we worthy of that inheritance? And the way that I've looked at them, at these different outlooks, I think they are looking at the same issue, I think. And I think there's obviously a slight difference between making Quakerism radical again and reviving Quakerism. But I think even with that, again, it's the idea that it was before, but it's not now. There's kind of like three different ways that I've seen that Quakers could do that. First one is through social action. So Quakers need to be more radical in social action. They need to revive their zeal for being out there in the world and fighting for justice and so on. So we need to be more radical in what we're doing. We can't simply sit back and just do petitions and writing letters to our MPs and going on demonstrations and things like that. We need to be more radical in what we're doing. I've seen that argument presented. Another angle might be the other two are maybe looking at maybe the theological aspects of Quakerism. One might some groups might say we need to really embrace the inherent Christian nature of our tradition, that we should go back to the Christian story and use that as a way to reignite Quakerism, which maybe has become over encumbered with universalism, and that sort of has diluted maybe the original Quaker message. Thirdly, and conversely, one might argue that in order for Quakerism to be truly radical, we need to sort of further the universalist angle of Quakerism and further include other faiths and be more open to other faiths than we even currently are, in order to offer a truly universal message to everyone. I've mentioned in other videos that we can't go back to the Quakerism of the 17th century. And I think everyone agrees with that. There's no one who thinks, right, we just basically need to be 17th century Quakers. We wouldn't be able to really function in today's society by doing that. So what can we actually do? What does being radical, if we're really going to be upholding that original Quaker message, how can we do that but still be part of this new world? Because obviously, we're not going to be running down the streets of Cambridge naked. Similarly, I think if I were to enter Bristol dressed up as Jesus and, subscribers of Quake It Up were behind me shouting, "Holy, holy, holy," that might get in the news, but it wouldn't have in any way the same sort of ramifications, thank goodness, as it did in the 1650s. Early Quakers got arrested a lot. They were doing things that at that time were considered really socially repugnant, and that got them in trouble, that got them in jail. I've talked a lot about that. I get the idea that they were strong believers of what they believed was the truth and what had been imparted to them by the Spirit, but I wonder if that's necessarily our goal as well. I don't think our goal, when we want to make Quakerism radical again, I think it does mean, if we're looking down the social action side, that we do want to be more involved and more maybe in your face and less nice than we have been. I don't think it means that we should be doing things that get ourselves arrested or doing things that are necessarily breaking the law, because I don't think that's necessarily going to be fitting with our aims either. It might get us a lot of attention, but is that necessarily what we want if it's at that cost? Imi, in her article, talks about sort of like our corporate image, I suppose. Like, would it be something be hurt by that? Her counter argument to that would be saying, well, if we are believers of the things that we say we uphold, and we allow these things to happen, is it not is our corporate reputation not being damaged by not doing anything? Which I think is perfectly reasonable. It's just a case of, how are we to be radical in this world? What's the correct answer there? I suppose what I think needs to happen in order to radicalize Quakerism or to revive Quakerism is to focus on our community and make that more, and revive that and make that more radical. But not radical necessarily because it's against society, but make it more inherently and essentially Quaker. not necessarily to say, oh, go out into the world and do all sorts of crazy stuff, but to, or if we are going to do that, do it for Quaker reasons as a Quaker, because that kind of builds everything together. That you've got the social action in there. In that case, you've got the Christian the Christian background in there. You've got the universalist background as well. If that is all brought together in a community that accepts these testimonies, that accepts this heritage, that accepts this opening up to new light, and we do that for Quaker reasons, and we're very explicit that we are that of the Quaker reasons for that, and be able to explain that story in a very Quaker way. I think we was talking with Ben Wood about that. We've got to be better at talking about our story, and I think if we do that, and we are more unapologetically Quaker in talking about things that are important to us, that we're saying them, we're talking about these using Quaker language, using Quakerese, using phrases that maybe people don't understand because they're not in our community, but that could get people thinking, well, who are these Quakers? What are they about? What's that about? I don't understand that at all. In that interview with Ben Wood, we were talking about, well, how can we do that when Quaker belief is so divided? When we've got the sort of maybe the extreme universalist that on one hand that believes that all faiths have something to offer and we must respect all faiths, and then we have maybe someone who's deeply Christian and thinks that the Christian way is the only way, which we have all of that in Quakerism. How do we blend that all together to create this sort of integral Quaker community that I'm talking about? So Ben Wood had some answers in there, so please do check that out for that. I think, however, probably the best thing that we can do as a society to bring these sort of separate strands together is to look at the Lamb's War. This idea of fighting against the world in a non-violent way, looking to bring the kingdom of God into the world. I mean, that was the original message of the Lamb's War, as used by early Quakers and by Christian Quakers probably still today. I've been reading this particularly on the blog Through the Flaming Sword, which is by Simon Davison. I'll put links to that below, because he's kind of talking about the new Lamb's War. And I think maybe, I think all Quakers believe in this sense of justice, believe in this sense of non-violence, believe in this world of peace. I think this is something that we could all sort of corporately support in the same way of the Testament is. But I think the problem that we may have with the Testament is that anyone can uphold these testimonies. Someone who's not even a Quaker, which is good, but it means that how can we be unapologetically Quaker if things that we're saying we're upholding, people who aren't Quaker at all can say, yes, well, we can too. Whereas I think if we look at it under the rubric of this Lamb's War, which is a very Quaker concept, and what that means for the world and how we act in the world, that allows for the social action. It allows for that Christian heritage. But then again, it also, these are concepts which people who maybe have never heard of Quakerism, but maybe still agree with, such as non-violence, such as peace, all that sort of stuff, can still get on board with. It reminds me of when I was doing my research for the video on Quakers and music, and I was listening to Paulette Meyer's interview on QuakeSpeak. She said, what I love about George Fox is that he's not someone who told people what to believe very much. He was someone who told people what to do. And I think that's had a very lasting effect on Quakerism. Quakerism is a faith which requires action to a certain degree. We look for sort of calls to action, and we want to put ourselves into the world. And I think we have to use the early friends as well as our examples. I think, again, that's a very Quaker thing to do. I think we are very keen to look back at the early friends and to take advice and to feel. I think if we feel that we are following on from their trajectory, I think Quakers would feel that they have revived Quakerism without necessarily going back to using thou and thy and all that sort of stuff. But as especially with my sort of angle, looking at it from a specifically community focus, it means that there has to be sort of broad agreement in that that's what we agree with, and that's what we want to do. And I suppose that's always where the problem comes down to. I think it just takes someone to be particularly eloquent and charismatic enough to sort of maybe lead it. I think we, Quakerism kind of does lack a leader, and I think maybe that's again something when we look back at George Fox and James Naylor and George Whitehead and Edward Burrows and Margaret Fell. All of these early Quakers. They were very clear leaders of that of that early movement, which we do lack. And I think obviously that's great in terms of our understanding of equality, and I think that works really well. But I think that doesn't mean that we can't have leaders. We can't have people who we look to for advice. And when speaking to Mark Russ, I was thinking that we do need theologians, for example, to give us advice on theology and stuff. Because how on earth are we meant to do that? I'm not a theologian. How are we going to get our Quaker? Where are we going to get our Quaker theological role models from? So I think we need leaders, not necessarily to lead us, but leaders in thought, leaders in social action, for example. I think we need those people to help bring that community into existence. Because if it's just a video on YouTube, or if it's just a blog post or something, then that could be disseminated, sure, but I mean, there's no one really trumpeting that, and I feel that's what we need if we're going to really sort of bring this community together, and then have those sort of conversations as to what works and what doesn't work, and how we're going to actually be this radical Quaker community revived. But we need people to be having this thing, and I think Quakers fundamentally are opposed to that, and I think that might be the thing to overcome. So yes, I'm not sure if that is the answer. I think this is the answer that I've come to at the end of this kind of rant. We need to do Quaker things for Quaker reasons and be able to explain them using Quaker rationale. We need to be a better community. We need to be a cohesive community. Maybe maybe we need to go against some of the things that the early Quakers needed to. We're talking about as well. Maybe we need to be more liturgical, perhaps. I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't necessarily think. Well, actually, I'm talking about, I talked about Lent last year. I think that there are ways we can reclaim times and seasons, for example. We can reclaim Christian ideas, or maybe even other ideas. I mean, I know, because I'm culturally Christian and so on. But there must be things that we can take, that we can make ourselves kind of into a peculiar people again, not out of the world and not disconnected, but that we are identifiable as Quakers. I think that would be really powerful, and that would garner interest. That would get people more interested in Quakerism, because they'd be able to, he's a Quaker. Now, I'm not saying we should be wearing, hats and have shaggy locks or whatever. I think that would make us more recognisable than if we, were just able to fit in nicely with the world and go through your day to day without anyone realising you're a Quaker. Going back to my video on be more Quaker. I think we would be more Quaker. I think we should be so Quaker, be Quakers in new ways, and I think everyone would kind of feel that if we did that, we would be more radical. We would be more revived, and I think maybe we might get more members. I don't know, but these are my ramblings. I commend them to you. What do you think? How do you think Quakerism should be more radical? Do you think Quakerism, and what does that mean? Should Quakerism be revived? What's the difference? I think it's a really big topic, and I think it's something that really plagues Quakerism in a way that I don't think you ever get. Should Catholicism be more radical? I don't think you get that. I think it is kind of a particular Quaker issue, and so Quakers, we should look at it. But I think we should not just say. I think too often it's said, wouldn't it be great if Quakerism were radical again? You read the old friends and that's amazing. We should be more radical again. We should be more like that. Actually think about how we're going to be like that. If that's something that we want to do, how are we going to do it? And let's actually have leaders out there who are going to help us to do it. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.